So hello, my name is Reverend Gail Morton. Welcome to Embracing the Soul's Journey. This is the second class in a series of 3 about the soul's journey through death, loss, and eternity. The first class was called Hello, I'm Grieving, which was designed to answer burning questions many people have around death and grieving, and to create space for today's class, which will walk you through a map of what's happening at a spiritual and energetic level in the time immediately before, during, and after someone takes their last earthly breath. In gathering our energy around this topic, I'm going to begin by praying us in with an invocation. Immersing in this sacred moment, this is what I know. There is only one. Call it love, peace, wisdom, joy, light, beauty. This intelligent divine energy is everywhere present, all powerful, and it is always giving of itself without hesitation. And I know that I am, and each person here is made in the image and likeness of this one. I am so grateful today for this time together, and I give thanks for the powerful light within each person here, and for knowing that this light is always present, growing and expanding as I move into our topic today. Please join me in saying, and so it is. So briefly, I'm a staff minister here at the center with a special focus on healing and healing practices through prayer, ceremony, and ritual. I'm also board certified in interfaith chaplaincy and pastoral care and spiritual counseling. And I've been a student of spiritual healing practices for more than 10 years. So with this background, I want to welcome everyone here today. I want to welcome everyone that is here now, and also anyone who joins us on YouTube later. I recognize many people will be listening to the recording. So if you're not here now, no worries. I will weave you into this discussion in many different ways. So why do people come to a class like this? Well, I would say most people come for 3 reasons. Someone in their life has recently transitioned or is on that journey. Maybe you're called to support individuals and their families on this journey, or you yourself want to understand what happens when you die. I created this class for all 3 reasons and more. Welcome to all of you. My intention for embracing the soul's journey is to give you an overview of the soul's journey into the body and out of the body from the perspective of modern consciousness studies. And I need to emphasize here that there are a lot of different perspectives on exactly how this happens. And I'm going to share just one with you today. My desire is that this sharing will help each of you and the people you support to meet this process easier and with grace and with ease. So you're going to hear me today use 2 terms interchangeably, death and transition. So transition best describes the eternal nature of the soul's journey. And the word death ensures that we all know exactly what we're talking about today, and we know exactly what's going on. So if you were in our first class, Hello, I'm Grieving, I shared a couple of fun ways we can connect. If we were all sitting in a room together, we'd be able to feel each other's energy. But we don't have that luxury today. So instead, I'm going to offer a couple of hand signals into our space. If these signals resonate with you, you're welcome to use them. So the first hand signal is this. You can call it a twinkle. I've been told it's American Sign Language for clapping. If I say something and you think, wow, that really resonates with me, give it a twinkle. It helps us create a connection within our field. Go ahead and try it if you're game. It actually feels really good. The other one is placing your hand on your heart. If something is said today that really resonates with you at a heart level and you feel moved, put your hand on your heart. This hand signal says, "You've touched me. I'm with you on this." It's simply a way to share our connection today. So here's our agenda for today. What we're going to cover simply in this class today is a map of what happens as the soul enters and leaves the body. Please type any questions you have into the chat, and I'll try to answer them at the end as we complete our journey. So first, some background. The body is finite. The body wears out. It stops being able to contain us. But the soul, or insert any name that resonates with you, is the part of us that is not our body. The part of us that is eternal. It is that which transcends the life of the physical body. I'm going to share one map of the soul's journey with you today. Please know that there are a lot of different maps. Different cultures and different spiritual and religious traditions all have different maps. The map I'm going to provide is a compilation of the works of modern consciousness researchers like Dr. Eben Alexander in his book about near-death experiences called Proof of Heaven, and The Journey of Souls by Michael Newton, and how their work intersects and complements the science of mind teachings. So outside of the different maps, people sometimes ask me, what do you think really happens when we die? Well, from my experience as a chaplain, companioning individuals through their end-of-life journey, my sense of what happens is that there's an underlying energetic dynamic that takes place through the journey of transition. As humans, we need language to explain that energy. So we put different images and words and stories to it. Those words and images vary by culture and tradition. But I believe what happens underneath is universal. So what I'm saying is that while we may choose to look at different maps, there is an objective energetic phenomena that happens underneath all of it. This is also what modern consciousness research has concluded. So there are lots of good maps, and as you might guess, none of them are exclusively correct. The challenge is to find the one that rings true for you, the one that gives you tools to be able to navigate the journey well. These maps are all derived from experiences that people have and have had through time and also across cultures. So I'm going to invite you now in the comfort of your own home to raise your hand as I name off some experiences that can happen around death and dying. If you've had one of these experiences, you know someone who has had one, or you've read about these experiences, please raise your hand. So how about dreams about people who have transitioned? Premonitions about death and dying. Mystical or inexplicable experiences at the deathbed. Near-death experiences. How about a sense of communication with the dead? Or synchronistic language. Sometimes it's birds or insects or a kind of conversation that actually happens back and forth. How about anything else that fits in that category that I might not have named yet? I definitely have a number of those. So these things happen, and they happen with enormous frequency, but we don't talk about them very much. These experiences are valid. They happen. They happen to all different people. And the question is then, what meaning do we place on them? And I'm going to talk today about these experiences. And I'm going to talk about them through the lens of the meaning that I put on them. Each of you can resonate with that meaning-making lens, or please feel free to find a different lens that works for you. What I believe is truly important is that we validate the experiences people have, because no matter what meaning you make of them, these experiences are tremendously helpful. If we invalidate them and make them invisible, we take away a really powerful healing force in the dying process. In Western culture, the meaning we often make of them is that they don't exist, that you didn't really have that experience, or your experience wasn't real. We tend to have this line between real and unreal, normal and paranormal, natural and supernatural. But our experiences can transcend that line. Often our own experiences are the deepest truth that we have. It's not that we deny these experiences, they're just invalidated with the consensus of silence. We don't share them. For those in our audience who've had them, I'm guessing you don't talk about them very much because they're delicate and they're fragile. And sometimes they can be beaten up if they get out into the public arena. But it is from these very experiences that our map today is derived. The truth is that our map and most maps are drawn from these experiences and from the science that has developed from studying them. So let's take a look now at the diagram on your screen. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here it is. How about a quick nod just so I know that everybody can see it? Okay, good. Lots of nods and lots of thumbs up. So take a look at this map on your screen. We have a large circle and then a smaller circle in the middle. Let's orient first, starting with the circle in the middle. Up on the top is where our soul is not in our body. It says discarnate, which means the soul is outside of the body. We then move clockwise around the circle, and at some point, the process of birth occurs on the right. The soul comes into the body. We're incarnate. Soul is in the body, in the lower half, and then somewhere over on the left is the process of death, where the soul leaves the body. On the outside of the large circle are phenomena, now given specific names through modern consciousness research. This is the map, and these are the phenomena we're going to dive into today. So birth and death are actually wide strips because they're processes, they're journeys, they don't happen in a moment. And we can stretch them open and find the different processes that occur. So we're going to start over on the right at birth. Now you can see that I've not written a lot on the birth side of this diagram because that is not my area of expertise. There's a process that has to do with conception, gestation, birth, and the movement of the soul into the body. And at some point, the soul comes into the body, and that's where I'm going to start. So one of the things I'd like to point out that's fun about this cycle is that you can start anywhere on it. There's essentially no beginning and no end. We're going to stop at some pivotal points on this map together. And these points come from research in transpersonal psychology and stories in Western culture about what happens. We're going to move clockwise around the circle. Different cultures would have different names, ways of naming all of the phenomena, and therefore there are going to be different maps. So on the birth side of the map, that's the right side of the map, what happens is that children can have preconception memories. They can have some awareness that some aspect of their consciousness was present during the conception and birth process. They sometimes remember the decision to come into the body. It looks like we might have a couple people that are not muted. Can everybody look and please mute themselves? Thank you so much. So they sometimes remember the decision to come into the body. Sometimes they remember being in the womb. Sometimes they remember the point of conception. If you want to dive into this more, there's a really good book written by Elizabeth Carmen about this process. It's called Cosmic Cradle. I'll share some amazing research from this book. She has documented children who at age 2, 3, or maybe even 4, driving in a city where the parents lived when the mom was pregnant, are able to say, "Oh, look, that's the building we went to when I was in your tummy." And it was the mother's doctor's office. There are lots of really amazing examples in this book around things that children know that they couldn't have known. This says to me, okay, here's this experience that's happening, and it's widespread. I'm amazed at the people who've had some experience of this. There's some part of us, I call it the soul, that is present and comes in. The other thing that happens is that children can have past life memories. The big research and writing around this is by Jim Tucker and Ian Stevenson. They're professors at the University of Virginia. One of their books is called Life Before Life. They have done a lot of work on past life experiences in children. And this is what the research has found. It seems when children have past life experiences, it's because the person who died, whose soul comes back, either died close by, or died very young, or died unexpectedly. It's like they slipped just a little way into the Bardo realm, and then out again and into a new body. Their research documents children who remember the house the soul lived in. They'll be able to go back and meet the family and know things that happened during that lifetime. For example, let's say it's the mom in a family who was incarnated in this new child. The child can say, "Oh, I know where she kept such and such," or "I remember a secret about that." They say amazing things that bridge across the two lives. So as we move down and toward the bottom right on the map, we get to after death communication. There are two ways to look at after death communication. One could be called spontaneous after death communication, and these are communications initiated by those on the other side of the veil, those who've already crossed over. These can be experienced in the form of dreams or visions or simply felt experiences. Here's an example. A son whose father had recently died experienced while he was climbing a ladder to fix something on the roof that suddenly he was looking out of his dad's eyes, along with a very strong sense of his father's presence. After-death experiences can be sense experiences like that. And what about synchronicities, messages, things that show up exactly at the right time? It could be songs or patterns of numbers. It could be a message on the beach written in stones. How many of you have experienced these synchronicities? Yeah, a number of people. These are both examples of being in conversation across the veil. As we become more aware of these communications and give them more credence, we can develop a glossary. So we start to recognize what they mean. So my glossary is a connection between visions of angels and my father. When I have a dream that has angels in it, I know there's a connection to my father. When angels appear in other areas of my life, which they do frequently, I'm pretty sure there's a connection there too. people develop a glossary. Visitations are also common. Visitations are experienced in many different ways. Looking through your eyes, or having someone arrive in the passenger seat of your car and you just know they're there. Visits in the middle of the night are fairly common too. My mother had this experience after my father died. His was a sudden death, and she was really struggling in her shock and grief. My mother said my father sat in the tall green chair next to their bed every night for weeks until she was doing better. So this short list of examples are after-death communications initiated from the other side of the veil. But there are also ways to initiate them from this side, which often requires us to alter our consciousness. We might do this through meditation, shamanic journeying, maybe through divination, really all sorts of things that take us out of our rational mind into a little more mystical mind. Intention, dream incubation, ritual, they all lift the fog just a little bit so we can see across. One of the books that I really recommend if you're interested in this is called Induced After-Death Communication. It's written by a clinical psychologist named Alan Botkin, and he was doing EMDR, bilateral eye stimulation with Vietnam vets. He worked at the VA, and the people he was working with started to have experiences of connection with either people they had killed or their buddies in the war who had been killed near them. He was able to move them into this amazing healing process. So in summary, after-death communications can be initiated from the other side of the veil, or we can initiate them from here. Now remember, there's no guarantee around these experiences. They are much more of a mystery than a vending machine. Our diagram looks all cut and dried, but in reality, there is immense mystery. Some things are difficult to grasp, and these experiences can start and stop, and ritual and spiritual practice can sometimes support and cultivate them. So let's continue down here into the lower part now of our circle. Another thing that happens down here is near-death experiences. Some of you may be familiar with that. And our awareness of near-death experiences is actually much greater since the advent of modern medicine. It's the experience of someone becoming clinically dead and then coming back. Their heart stops, their breath stops, but somehow they come back. Very often they have memories of what's happened while they were gone. One of the magical, wonderful parts about this is that people very often have similar memories of their experiences on the other side. Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, is a really powerful book on that. He's both an MD and a PhD in philosophy, so he comes at it at a really interesting angle. And Moody has determined that the more dead you are medically, the more likely you are to have the more extreme experiences. He would describe these experiences as happening in stages. In the first stage, people experience a dissociative process, really an out-of-body experience where things just get a little looser. There's a detachment from pain, and often there's a sense of really deep well-being. As people move farther into the near-death experience, they realize they are dead. They look down and they see their body. They can hear and see things that are happening in the surgery suite, for example. They can hear and see things going on in the building they're in that they wouldn't be able to know otherwise. They can often see around corners and through walls and hear people's thoughts. As death deepens, people begin slipping further around the circle on our map. They move further around into the top part of this diagram on the left. They hear music, and often they have a life review where their life flashes before their eyes. Some describe it like being in a dream, and that it's all happening simultaneously. They're in the middle of it. It's incredibly fast, but incredibly complete, the way a dream can often be. So people re-experience their life, but they experience it from the perspective of the people they were in relationship with. Did they leave good feelings behind them in their activities or not? That's what they report they experience. So one of the amazing things about the life review is that they can happen so quickly. People who have jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived sometimes report having had a life review before they hit the water. Now that opens up an interesting question for me, because at that point their body is still completely healthy. There's nothing hallucinatory, there's no chemical change happening, but something is happening because they've experienced this life review. People also get shown different levels of the afterlife. Sometimes they're shown future events that will happen in their life, things that encourage them or maybe even inspire them to try and come back. Maybe that a child or grandchild will be born, or something will happen that they want to be here for. Then there's something even deeper. It's a place of a choice point on the left side of our circle. People often describe this choice point as a bridge, a gateway, maybe even a doorway. There's a threshold that people need to cross over. They understand clearly this crossover point is the point of no return. Once they pass this point, they can't come back. We, of course, don't have any direct reports of people who have been past this point. Bottom line, there's a lot of amazing research in near-death experiences, and the stories are truly amazing. A close acquaintance of mine tells the story about her near-death experience when she was a teen, about 15 years old. She and her brother had a very strong psychic connection. In her experience, she came to that choice point. Her experience in the liminal space was amazing. Being in the space was beautiful, and she was ready to keep going. She remembers then her brother reaching in and grabbing her by the scruff of her neck and pulling her back and out. Her brother, who was across the country when this was happening and didn't know that his sister had been in danger, had the exact same experience. Again, you can make your own meaning out of this story. But what I really value and trust are people's experiences and their descriptions of what they've experienced. So some near-death experiences are reported as distressing, but the vast majority of them fall into the beautiful, inspiring category. There's also a lot of research, really interesting research about that. One of the understandings seems to be that maybe they're incomplete, or maybe they were actually the healing. This was the healing that the person actually needed. And often when people have a distressing near-death experience, they come back and have a profound life change. There's a real transformative healing impact on their life here. Now, sometimes I think perhaps it's a little bit like a nightmare, because sometimes nightmares have something to teach us, right? They're not appealing, and sometimes we don't go looking for them, but there can be real value in them. So you might ask, what are the after effects of near-death experiences? And what I've read is that there's several things. Often people lose their fear of death. That's very common, and develop a deeper belief in a spiritual reality. They become open to a much wider reality. And for some people, it's challenging because it is so beautiful there that it's hard to come back. And often these people need help to integrate the fact that they are still alive. Okay, back to our circle. As we move around and up the left side of our circle, another experience that people have is that of death awareness. Death awareness is when we are close to death. but there's no physical change in our body. It's a psychological experience of death, an experience when death feels incredibly close. This is actually the same experience as a near-death experience, but the physical body has only had emotional or psychological shifts. Falling off the Golden Gate Bridge is a good example of death awareness. Death is close, but there has been no change yet in the physical body. So let me share another example. A grenade lands but doesn't go off, and the soldiers think they're going to die. There's a story in the book called Opening Heaven's Door about a group of soldiers. A grenade landed in the middle of them that they all expected to go off. They had near-death experiences of crossing the veil deeper and deeper, and they experienced this phenomenon together. They left as a group, and when they came back, they could share that experience because it happened to them collectively. Now, that experience was a great example of death awareness, and for me, it also opens up a whole other question about what's happening in our psyches and whether consciousness is individual or collective or all of the above. So this threat of death awareness happens when we're on the cusp, when the veil is close, when death is near. It can look like messages that are somehow sent from one person to another when they're in danger. Knowing that someone's going to die and suddenly getting in a plane and flying across the country just in time when it couldn't have been expected is a real life example. Or knowing that something bad has happened or that someone has had an accident. It's not always death. It's also serious, life-threatening events too, and knowing that something's happened when there's no way you could have known. I had this experience when my father died. I was mowing the lawn outside and I felt a crushing, absolutely crushing blow to my entire body. And along with this physical experience, I sensed a message that said, turn off the mower, go inside, and wait by the phone. It's your dad, and it isn't good. I did just that. And within about 5 minutes, the phone rang, and a man on the other end of the phone said my mother needed me to come to the hospital emergency room immediately, that it was my dad. I asked him if my dad had died, and he began to cry and said my mother made him promise he would not tell me that my father had died. But I already knew. So death awareness can happen living to living. It can also happen between the living and the dead. There are lots of stories about that. I have a friend whose husband, just before they got married, had been swimming and he started to drown. He thought he was going to die. Out of nowhere, he experienced his brother who had died 2 years earlier, materializing and helping him to the shore. You see, the call is almost like a thunderclap through the ethers when death is close, and it can pull both the living and dead in support. So I'm going to unshare my screen for a second. There we go. And just see how this is landing with people. Is this resonating? Let me know. Give me a thumbs up or okay. Looks like it's resonating. Is it working for you? Okay, good. Thank you. It's just good to remember outside of this that you guys are all here. Now I'm going to pull up a new second slide. Here we go. Here's our second slide. Now what we're focusing in on is exclusively the left side of our circle. What's happening here on the left side of our map is generally not a sudden death, but dying gradually through age or illness. This is when people are in active dying or laboring to die. Of course, you labor when you come into the world, so often you labor as you go out. What's happening over here is nearing death awareness. It's also known as NDA. And the way I imagine it, the soul and the body are slowly starting to separate. It's not a light switch. It's a slow separation. People start to be less aligned with and less anchored in this reality and more attuned to the next realm. This is really a threshold space where people who are dying have a foot in both worlds. They're still here, but they're a little bit over there too. And they have experiences of being able to sense and be aware of what's in the next realm. Often people start to speak a different kind of language, or they might speak metaphorically. They speak metaphorically and they start to say things like, I have a train to catch, or I need to go shopping, or I have to buy this, or maybe I need to go home now. These people can't do these things, but they really don't want to do these things. These are metaphors for the big moment that's coming, this highly energized point of death. There are some amazing books around this, but the one that I enjoy the most is by an author whose name is Lisa Smart, and it's called Words at the Threshold. She's a linguist, so she brings that perspective to her writing. And she talks about it not as what people say, but actually as what they experience as they die. So some people experience visitations. If we imagine visitations down at the bottom of our full map, they're fully on this side of the veil. The top part of this map is fully on the other side of the veil. Visitations are the dead, the ancestors making a journey across to this side. Alternatively, a near-death experience is someone from this side making a journey across to that side. You see, there's a lot of fluidity. So as people die, they often see grandparents and friends who've died, maybe pets, and sometimes people who they don't even know, but it's typically figures and people. And these experiences are really different from hallucinations or what's called terminal delirium, which is another phenomena that happens as people die. Hallucinations and terminal delirium are very confusing and they're distorting and they don't make a lot of sense. And they can be really scary. People can see things like bugs crawling on the walls. And I didn't include this on our map as the complexity is immense and quite frankly, it doesn't happen very often. The visitations I'm talking about are not scary. They are healing and they are loving and people are fully awake and oriented as they happen. Let me share an example. I talked to a family member who was visiting her dad. He was talking to her and he said, "That's a nice little dog sitting over there, isn't it?" And then he was back into the conversation with her. He wasn't disoriented. He just saw a dog that she didn't see. He was having a real connection to another dimension. And there's often a progression, and that's where Lisa Smart and her linguist approach comes in. She encourages people to record what people say, because it may sound like nonsense, but it's just nonsense from this side of the veil. It makes complete sense on that side of the veil. So she tells stories about a dying man who said, "Oh, I see a girl in a little blue dress." Then 3 days later, he said, "The girl in the little blue dress is back. She came into my room this time." We're both feeling a little sad. And a couple of days later, the girl in the little blue dress is back again. She sat on my bed. We're going to go somewhere soon. And then, the day before he died, I'm getting ready to go with the girl in the little blue dress. He said lots of things during those days, and they didn't seem to make much sense. But by tracking them, you start to see there actually was sense making. But it was just not sense in this realm. So we get really excited about our 5 senses in this realm, but these 5 senses are not the operative senses in the other realm. In fact, there are amazing anecdotes about blind people who have had near-death experiences. People who have been blind since birth, they slip out of their body on the operating table and they are able to see all that is happening when they couldn't see from their physical eyes. senses here get a whole new definition. So people having near-death experiences often experience love and light. They experience energy and music. Again, it's this veil that's thinning. Some of the things that happen at death are similar to what happens at the beginning of near-death experiences. People are starting to slip across. So there's another phenomena called terminal lucidity that I'm going to share today. Terminal lucidity is when someone has been in a coma or has some physiological issue where they're not able to connect and converse. Maybe it's dementia, maybe it's a brain injury. Maybe they've just been in a deep, deep end-of-life coma. In terminal lucidity, there'll be a resurgence of alertness. Even people who are just fading sometimes pop back, and this can be really amazing. Family often think, oh, they're getting better. I think what happens is people come back in to get their bearings, to get some leverage, and then out they go. Often they'll sit up, look around the room, and say to the family, I love you so much. It's been a great life. Then they'll lie back down and they won't speak again. Or maybe they'll have a few hours of amazing connection. Terminal lucidity is a really amazing gift when people are able to experience it. I'm wondering how many people here might have experienced that with a friend or a loved one. Yeah, it's very, very common. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. So we've talked a lot today about deathbed experiences and why. Everything we can do to make a space to bring these experiences into our awareness serves us, and it serves dying people and their families when we're supporting them. And many of you here do just that. A big part of this map and bringing these aspects of death into our conversation is to give these experiences a place so we can be with them, so that we can recognize them, and so we can know what to look for. It helps us to know when mom says, I want to go home, not to dissuade her and try and remind her that she's in the hospital and can't go home, but instead to meet her where she is and say, you're going home soon. Or what are you going to do when you get home? To meet her where she is and to honor that. So with all this material, there's an enormous opportunity to open people's eyes to the fact that these are possibilities of experiences to have and to consider how we might facilitate them. With patients and families I support in pastoral care and hospital chaplaincy, the more they know about these experiences, the more confident they are going into the dying process, whether they're dying themselves or someone they love and they're supporting is. So I'm going to take a minute and put our first slide back up again. There we go. So let's focus now on the upper left curve of our circle. Find the word choice point. So at some point we hit the choice point. This is the threshold. This is the point where one is truly, thoroughly dead. There's no coming back at this point. Then you cross into the next realm, into this discarnate realm. The material here comes from the work of Michael Newton and his book, Journey of Souls. It's an amazing book. He's a clinical psychologist who for many years studied death regression. So if you think about this diagram as being a cycle, we're out of the body, we're in the body, we're out of the body, we're in the body. The process of past life regression takes people back to the experience of being in a body. They remember being in a certain place at a certain time, Or maybe they're a certain historical figure, a character. Clinical psychologist Michael Newton, in this book's Journey of the Souls, was doing past life regression. And when he was doing it, people started to have what he calls past death regressions, where they remembered this part of the journey being out of a body between lives. Newton has to be in his late 80s by now, if he is still living, but he's been doing this for a long time, and there's a whole field of research and practice that he's evolved out of his initial work. And amazingly, as with past near-death experiences, people have very similar experiences. They cross this choice point line, and there's an experience of welcome. You're not very far across, so some of the cultural trappings, some of the family trappings, who we were, our ego, our identity in this life, are still a bit connected to us. And we experience ourselves being welcomed by friends and family who died, those who have crossed over. There's a reception and a celebration. If you go a little further along, there's a chance for healing. If people have had hard lives or hard deaths, and all this research has gathered from the experiences of people who are regressed, and Newton built this actual model from this, they describe it as a kind of retreat center or a healing space where people can go and recover and catch up from whatever it's been like before. Then they move on to a self-evaluation place. So the understanding of this cycle, this map, is that we go around it and around it and around it. If you can imagine it in 2 dimensions, say the image is flat on the table, as we spiral around, we're moving up and up and up. That sounds like Dr. Ernest Holmes, doesn't it? Each time we pass through the cycle, we learn something. And there are things that can only be learned in the bottom half, in the physical dimension. So that explanation for many of us sounds a lot like reincarnation. So how does this fit into the New Thought teachings? Well, first remember that Dr. Ernest Holmes, who wrote The Science of Mind, was highly influenced by 2 men, Thomas Troward, who drew extensively from the teachings of Hinduism and Buddhism, and Ralph Waldo Emerson in his belief in the spiritual nature of everything and of all knowledge through intuition. In Dr. Holmes' culmination of these teachings, The Science of Mind, Holmes taught the eternality of life. He taught that we accept that our physical bodies operate within a natural cycle of birth and death. That even though we may have a body, we are not just our body. What we really are is the life that animates our body. And that life is infinite and immortal. In our discussion today, we are calling that part of us that is eternal, the soul. We're calling it the soul. As we're learning here today, Dr. Holmes also believed that as we become increasingly identified with our divine and eternal nature, our underlying fear of death begins to dissolve and our experience of life becomes more joyous. And that is the primary reason that we are all here today. So bottom line, Dr. Ernest Holmes neither endorsed nor rejected any particular theory of reincarnation. Rather, he said, since life is eternal, there are an unlimited number of possibilities for its evolvement after the experience of physical death. We accept the ongoingness of life and we deal with what is before us in the present moment. And it's this foundation that we're building upon today, as Ernest Holmes, of course, lived in a generation well before the research that brought us today's presentation model. So one of the things I find so powerful about this model and what I find so helpful when I work with patients, their families, and the curious, is that it can give a framework and a meaning to deaths that are really difficult and to lives that are also really difficult. And for me, that rings true with the picture of the world that I have. a world that is ultimately guided by love, even though there are hard and bad things that happen. So what happens when we die? The soul's journey is not a linear conveyor belt. There's different timing for everybody, but at some point, people are here long enough and they start to make the turn towards coming back down and into a body. People choose their life. I'm on the right side of the circle. And then they start to prepare, getting more and more aligned. And then, just as we cross into this experience of being born, we forget everything that happens above the line. That forgetting is what allows us to be fully here and do all the learning that happens here. We are now fully around the circle. So I'm going to take our slide down. Here we go. So to wrap up then, I want to accentuate that naming, validating, and making space for these experiences we've explored today opens up an incredible possibility for being able to meet death with more grace and confidence. This image that we have, that life and death are like a light switch, on and off. We exist, and then there's nothing. It's not useful, and it's not accurate. Needing connection, needing relationship, needing community, that's a fundamental aspect of what it is to be human. If death is the end of everything, the end of existence, the end of relationship, the end of community, the end of all of that, no wonder we are all so dug in against it. If we can hold death as a way of still being in relationship, still being held in the web of life, just in a different part of it, it can soften how we are with it. If we can develop a framework, again, this is just one set of meanings. There are other meanings you can put on the experiences. Please do. It gives people a way to proceed. When the medical system says there's nothing else that can be done, what do you do with that? If you can see death as the journey, you can say, okay, there are things that can be done. There are ways that I can cooperate with this process instead of resisting it. So as I wrap up the teaching part here, I want to emphasize that death and dying are more complex and mysterious than linear and rational. So I want to take a look at the chat just a moment before we close out and just see. Good morning. Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. I don't see any specific questions, so we'll continue to move forward into our close. So as we close out this session, I want to give you an opportunity to share something that resonated strongly for you. What really held a lot of energy today? There's something that happens when we articulate our learning to ourselves, and this is a chance to do that. So I'm going to invite you to type a comment in the chat around two things: what you're taking with you from here and what you're leaving behind. So what you're taking with you might be a new perspective, maybe a new insight. Maybe what you're leaving behind might be a stress or an anxiety. So if everybody will find the chat box at the bottom of your screen, please take a moment and type in a comment around what you're taking with you from here and what you are choosing to leave behind. Can everybody find the chat box at the bottom of the screen? It's in gray. It says chat. Physical death is just another step in the soul's journey of eternal life. Thank you, Holly. leaving behind fear and remembering that our connection are beyond the physical. Beautiful, Dale. Cooperating with the process for myself and my clients, leaving behind a little of the fear. Thank you, Kathy. I appreciated the discussion of the separation of the body from the soul as one moves closer to transitioning. Beautiful. Please continue to write your comments in the chat. It's just a wonderful way to process what we've just all experienced together. So as we close today, I am so grateful to have you all here. I'm so grateful to the teachers behind me and those who have been my patients and friends. I'm hoping that I stand in a lineage with all of them. So what comes through me goes through you, and that it goes out through you to the people you support, the people you teach, the people that you love. Thank you for joining me today. Please know that at 10 a.m. every single morning we have amazing, rich, and diverse programming. Check it out. The banner on the CSL Palm Desert website will give you all the details. So I'm going to close now with a benediction. As I close this amazing heart space, this heart space where I feel such deep, deep gratitude, I am so very grateful for today's gift of connection. I'm so thankful for the ageless, timeless, infinite, and ever-giving spiritual energy that has immersed every moment of this time together. I now bless each friend forward in light and in love, knowing the vibrant energy of the universe guides, guards, and protects as each person here. And all is well. Please join me in saying, and so it is. Amen. Thank you for joining me today, everyone.